Okay, hi everyone. I'm Abigail Copenhaver, or Abby Copenhaver is fine. I was hoping to introduce myself in person with you guys at the tour, but of course that didn't happen, unfortunately. Um, I love being in person, especially on the farm with the cows and just being able to meet everybody. But this will have to be the next best thing. And of course, in today's world, we are very used to virtual. So hopefully you guys will still find this super helpful. I have my screen shared on a Google site that I made for our nutritional information regarding our tour today. It was supposed to accompany the in-person part, and I was going to wow you guys with I said to myself, I really have to wow them because in today's age, our students are super savvy with the technology, so I have to kind of meet them where they're at. So anyways, I thought that this would be a really, really great paperless version that's super accessible for you guys because, of course, after we have some of these presentations, we remember how it made us feel, right? But not exactly the information. So it hopefully will be really accessible for you guys so you have it all in one spot. Now, a lot of the information I did here is all information from New York Beef Council pages or beef research at the national level as well. And some people might think, oh, well, this is all kind of, coming from beef, it's all beef. But I really like to tell people I like to keep all the information the same because it's having that constant repetition of the same information that makes things not confusing and then you don't have either the misconceptions, it's easier that way. And what a lot of people don't realize with commodity groups, a lot of their research dollars, I shouldn't say a lot, all of their research dollars are regulated by the USDA. So you could argue, in my opinion, that the research produced by checkoff dollars are some of the most reliable and credible because there's a lot of back checking and channels that have to go, the appropriate channels that have to be going through to make sure the research is done appropriately and isn't being misused or anything like that. And it's being done correctly and ethically. So that's why if you follow some of the links that I have on here, it'll lead you to a lot of the same information. There's a wealth of information out there that between the New York Beef Council and some other sources I have on here, but we can't go over all of it. So I kind of compiled what I thought was most relevant for you guys and put it here in this site. So we're going to start off with the nutrition portion, and there's kind of two sections here, which is why I have the 1 and 2. And then we're going to end briefly with some more resources and applications here, number 3, and then of course contact information, which at this point you guys probably already have, but of course it's always great. I'd rather have you have it twice than not at all. So, okay, so let's start off with today's nutritional environment, right? If we're going to be talking to consumers about beef, sharing the information that we're learning here today, we kind of want to know where people are coming from, right? So today's nutritional environment can be a little tricky because unfortunately, a lot of the vocalness from the nutrition community and our consumers, they might not be the largest part of what people believe, but they have the largest voice. So sometimes the actual data doesn't always match up with what our perception might be. So I do have some interesting statistics here. So over 2/3 of consumers actually feel pretty positive about beef, and almost half feel pretty positive about beef production. So when we think about consumer factors, we have to think about what things do people go through in their mind when they're making those decisions about how they're purchasing food. So I kind of just put a few up here that are big for me. And they could be big for other people, might not be in the same order or might not mean the same thing, but they're still probably in the forefront of their mind. So cost is a big one, of course, but cost might look differently for certain people. Transparency, so people just they don't like being confused. They want to go in, they want to be able to see a product, have it be straightforward, right? Not be confused or think something shady is going on. Sustainability, whether people know what that means or not, a lot of people like it. Of course, nutrition, we want it to be delicious, and we want it to be versatile, right? We want to be able to, we can take something and use it in a lot of different ways. Uh, that's just a plus all the way around. So what others can you think of? Obviously, I can't interact with you right now, but I'm sure some things are coming to the forefront of your mind. about maybe some other things that I don't have listed here because obviously this isn't the end all be all for lists, but just to get your mind jogged about what, when you're being put in that mindset of the consumer. Of course, we are consumers, so that shouldn't be too difficult. These are some things that we think about. So as I'm going through here, I'm going to kind of be using this site. So hopefully you guys will get an idea of how it's built. So it's pretty user-friendly. Of course, this is the laptop version. It is pretty phone-friendly too, but it might just expand and be presented a little bit differently. The one tour we did, we had everybody out on their phones, and I felt super savvy because it was working pretty well, and we didn't have to have any papers, so I was happy. So in purchasing beef, consumers actually are purchasing beef despite economic conditions. So one thing that you really speaks true to a product is even when shopping dollars are tight, if people are still purchasing it, that really says something. So people might be purchasing beef a little differently because as we can see, they're preferring to dine in with beef, purchases out, but they're still purchasing it. And that e-commerce, so that online shopping is pretty popular. And what I find most interesting about this, okay, so 44% of shoppers are still including beef in their carts, which is great. But what I find interesting is I always am one of those people where I'm an interactive shopper. I like to be able to pick up, look, and inspect my own items that I'm putting in my cart, right? So it's very fascinating to me that someone thinks nothing of it to have a stranger sell another stranger who is shopping for you a product, have that stranger drop it off at your house or put it in the back of your car, and you're like, yep, looks good. But that also is a true testament to the food safety in our country, that people don't think much of that because our food safety is so good in the US that we don't have to worry about that. And it's great because people can still, it eliminates barriers and people can still get their beef as well as their other food products. So beef and competitors, right? Because that's another big thing we get questions about. Are meat alternatives comparable to beef when it comes to nutrition? What about all these other things that people are saying you can substitute for beef, like lab-grown meat and things like that? So 86% of households that do purchase meat alternatives still are purchasing ground meats. So they're not necessarily replacing it. It might just be something else that they're using. And 3% of those households exclusively produce meat alternatives. So again, it might be a little misleading with people being super vocal about some of this stuff. It doesn't necessarily match up with the numbers, which is important because as we'll go into the nutrition factors, you really replacing that nutrition that's found in beef can be really difficult. So meat alternatives make up less than 1% of the fresh protein market. And really, when we're looking at animal proteins, you can see in this pie chart here, animal proteins versus meat alternatives. So this is all animal proteins, not just beef exclusively. We can see that meat alternatives make up less than 1% of all that piece of the pie consumed. And then even just beef versus beef alternatives. So we're looking pretty more clear cut. So beef versus people that are using beef alternatives, it's even still less than 1%. So we're still seeing a lot of beef consumed, which is important when we're talking to people because I feel like sometimes in the nutrition world, we get in these very niche mindsets and we kind of maybe lose out on the actual majority of what our consumers are, like with our family households and even nutrition assistance programs and things like that, and just those people specifically. So having this data sometimes can be really surprising to people. So with consumer perception, right? So what are people thinking when they view beef? A lot of it's just people are too removed from the farm. People mostly find that they trust farmers right up there with, like your policemen, your firemen. They have a lot of trust in farmers. They just don't know a lot of farmers. Even vets, they have a lot of trust in them. It's just they don't know what's going on farms and they don't know exactly what is it that we're trusting them with. So the people that do actually have concerns, it's mostly around animal welfare, as you can see here. So they're not saying that these people are saying they're concerned because they think something's wrong. They're just saying, oh, if I do have concerns, my concerns are about animal welfare. And again, it's related to just not being on the farms, which is great why you guys were on the farms when you were, to be able to see that and be able to, and that's why I really like when you can be in person, because a lot of times there's just a component of being in person that helps resonate that with you so you don't forget it. And so you can just remember when you see it in person, you can convey it to people when you're answering those questions. And that's just really great. So we can see here that overall, most perceptions for beef are pretty positive. It's just really just answering those questions for people and helping them realize that you and the farmers are where they need to seek those questions that they have, because I like to say that they're going to get the answer from somewhere. We don't want them to get the wrong answer. So it's really important to put ourselves out there as the nutrition experts and put ourselves out there in, you know, teamed up with farmers so that we're all saying, hey, we're teamed up with farmers. We're learning from each other as the nutrition experts, as the farmers, to try and present you guys with the correct information so that you guys can get your questions answered. You don't feel like, you're being hoodwinked or things like that. So as you can see here, you don't even have to go back. You can keep navigating through. We're going to go on to 2. And 2, I actually have a lot of a subtopics. So we're going to go over a lot of great research. So we're going to talk about beef basics, which will lead us into kind of talking through some of the big topics surrounded by beef, like your heart health, beef in the early years, which is what I'm really excited about, because it's kind of an up and coming, something that I hope will stay very relevant with beef, because I think it's so important. And then, of course, beef and activity. Some of you are saying, beef and activity, don't you mean beef and athletes? But I'm going to get to that. Okay, so beef basics here. So 3 ounces of beef delivers 25 ounces of high quality protein. So one thing that we need to remember is, yes, a huge juicy steak is very delicious, but it doesn't have to be the huge juicy steak, because a lot of people, when I talk to them, are like, well, ground beef makes sense, but I just don't see how eating steak as a family can be cost effective. Well, one, you don't have to eat that much to get that high quality protein. It's very nutritionally dense. And of course, the great thing is you can have a steak, which is really delicious, but you can get the equal amounts of nutrition whether you're getting a cheaper, leaner cut in ground beef. So what beef is so versatile with all the different cuts to be able to meet a low key at home dinner occasion or something super fancy. Maybe we're celebrating something and it can still deliver that great nutrition that you need. So to kind of get to brass tacks, okay, just so that we can get in the right mindset, right? Because we're bouncing over from talking about consumers. So proteins, right? Proteins are made up of 20 unique amino acids, and 11 of those our body can kind of uh, get with the program on its own, through the foods we're eating, break it down, be able to meet our needs. But nine of those are essential. So think about it. What does essential mean? Essential means that we need to consume it through our food. And the awesome thing about beef is it contains all 9 of those essential amino acids. So it's really hard to argue with, because you're like, okay, I need 9. I can eat this one thing and all 9 are there. Like, boom, done. Okay, so just the ease and convenience of that, no matter what your lifestyle is pretty hard to argue. And then especially if you add on the just hassles of life, like if you're a parent and you're dealing with different taste preferences and just planning meals and things like that, having it all one and done. I mean, think about it. That's why people like things like shakes and, protein bowls, because you can put it all in one and it's there, you're done. So this is really, it goes along those lines. So amino acids are very, very important for building and replenishing muscle growth. So no matter what age or stage you're in, this is relevant, right? Whether you're in those younger years where you're actually building and developing your body, or if you're in childbearing years, or if you're an athlete, or if you're just going about daily activities, or if you're older and you're moving into that phase of your life where muscle breakdown, muscle atrophy happens more rapidly, that amino acids, those 9 essential amino acids from things like beef, are going to be really, really crucial in helping you maintain and recover and feel great and getting that consistently. So why include beef in a healthy eating pattern? If you haven't caught on already, very passionate about beef. And if you haven't kind of honed into that already, I love this picture, because not only does it highlight all of the reasons nutrient wise why beef are great, is I feel like it really drives home beef making you feel strong and powerful. And I think that's important, because a lot of times with health, people translate health into being thin, or whatever thin is, or losing weight. And we really, really need to help people understand that healthy is strong, not necessarily associated with some hypothetical weight number that people think that they should be. And some people might be saying, huh, 10? I thought we were talking about 9 essential amino acids. So it gets a little confusing here because beef actually has another great thing about it. So it has those 9 essential amino acids, right? So that's just in reference of the high quality protein. On top of that, there's 10, protein being only one of those, essential nutrients in it. So those 9 essential nutrients, amino acids, essential amino acids, are only just one of those 10. So this chart is talking about those 10 essential nutrients that's in there. So we have the protein here, that's only talking about the amino acids, but then we have all these other great nutrients that help with your body and just really, I mean, it's amazing how much nutrients can be packed in 3 ounces of food. So, and plus it tastes delicious. So, um, what does 25 grams look like, protein look like? Because sometimes people say, well, you can get it from other sources, which sometimes there are circumstances where people cannot consume beef. So there are ways to get those 25 grams of protein because that's really what you're aiming for, 25 grams to 30 grams per meal throughout the day if you're an adult. But what if you can't? So it is doable, but it is not easy. And when we talk about plant sources of protein, it's very rare that you're going to find plant sources of protein that have all 9 essential amino acids. So it might be 25 grams of protein, but that does not mean that it's going to have those 9 essential amino acids. Now, there are a few exceptions like quinoa, but you're going to have to eat 3 cups of quinoa every time you want the 25 grams. So that's not as enjoyable as having, or I shouldn't speak for everybody, but it's not going to be as easy as having your 3 ounces of steak. And then, of course, there's some other examples they have here too. So, really, a lot of times, if you're trying to consume this through plant sources, you're usually going to be combining plant sources to get to your total 9 essential amino acids. So it's just a little more tricky and it has to be super planned out, which is why, if you're talking about feeding kids or things like that, I think it's super dicey because how are you going to reason with a kid, oh, you have to eat a little bit more of this to make sure you can hear. They're going to be like, no, immediately no. So one last thing I have on this page before I jump on over to heart health is I'm a very visual person. And I found on Beef's website some really great visuals for different cuts. And I love this because it kind of starts with the bigger sections. And then as you go down the list, the cuts of that get smaller. So, for example, with the chuck roast, that's the biggest piece of that section of the cow. And from your chuck roast, when you keep cutting it smaller, you would get shoulder roast or shoulder steak or, ranch steak. Now, these aren't all the cuts possible known to man under the sun, but it encompasses most of them. And a lot of people might not, if I was to say porterhouse steak, they might say that sounds familiar, but I don't remember. But if you show a picture of it, people, oh, okay, yeah, okay, that's porterhouse. Having some of these visuals can be great. And then, of course, at the very top here in this banner, it shows where where is Chuck located. Now, if you're not super familiar with cow anatomy, you might not know the end from the back, but just for preference or for reference point, Chuck would be the shoulder. So the head would be on this left end of the cow, and round would be where maybe the thigh or the buttocks. So the leg would be on that back right side of this chart, just to give you a viewpoint. But I have another chart in here that actually does a really great job making sure you don't get turned around because it actually has the whole cow drawn out. And then these are kind of inside there. So I'll show you what I'm talking about when I get to those. And then the other cool thing is it actually has a little emoji key associated with each cut to show you what the preferred recommended cooking methods are. Because the other thing I get with people a lot is they might not be super in love with beef. They're like, oh, it's really hard to know how to cook it. And unless you do cook beef all the time, you might not, know how to cook each cut or even know that not all cuts are created equal. So you should be cooking them differently, especially depending on the fat content. So it could make or break your love for beef if it's, and really, if you have a cut of meat, you have a cut of beef and you use the right cooking method, you don't have to do much to it. You do not have maybe a little salt, a little pepper, but barely anything. So it really can make or break your cooking experience using the right cooking method for sure. Okay, so next topic here, we're going to talk about heart health because this is a big one that I get from people, right? Just immediately, people think beef and heart health are, just at it. But it's a huge misconception because we have a lot of research that shows incorporating 7 to 8 ounces of fresh cooked lean meat per week could actually improve cardiac metabolic disease factors. So we're not talking about just neutral. We're actually talking about going, the other way, improving them. So you're talking about those markers like high blood pressure, HDL cholesterol, and other markers associated with diabetes risks. And this is research that we have on this. There's a lot of science we have. We have over 20 scientific studies that actually support the role of lean beef in a heart healthy diet. And people say, okay, well, yeah, lean beef, but either one, lean beef isn't as tasty as the higher fat stuff, or two, maybe it's more expensive. They think that lean beef is a way of being like tricky about it. But what people don't realize is majority, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit and go back. The majority of your cuts you're going to find actually, by definition, qualify as a lean piece of beef. So we have over 40 cuts of beef that are considered lean according to USDA's definition of lean. So in a 3-ounce serving, as long as it has less than 10 grams of total fat, 4.5 grams of that being saturated fat, and then less than 95 grams of cholesterol, it meets that definition. And that's important to know because that's whether some people just want that lean slapped on there. Okay. And I'm saying they're probably, you're not really going to use, you can't use the definition, USDA lean definition, unless it meets those terms. But you can buy beef in a lot of different menus, right? Because we have a lot of people working directly with growers or things like that. So you might not have that marketing labeling. But what people might not realize is, you might be working with somebody directly buying beef from them. And just because they're not slapping a sticker on it saying it's lean, it probably is still lean cut of meat because as long as it's meeting this nutritional definition, you're still getting used. I just hate when people are like, well, I love my beef, but I feel guilty about it. It's like, no, don't feel guilty about it. Most of the time your cuts are considered lean. And, there's lots of ways, which I'm going to talk about, to improve the leanness of your cut and feel good about it. Feel good about eating your beef. So a lot of the diets, going just back up to the top, that kind of lead the example as far as why lean beef can be great as far as living a healthy lifestyle. A lot of these are just diets that are highlighting all the food groups. We're not cutting out any major food groups. We're not cutting out any major nutrient groups or macro groups or micro groups. It's really just sticking with the basics, eating those plant-based diets, pairing them with lean animal proteins, and staying consistent. I know it doesn't sound sexy, and with nutrition, we struggle with this because people want dieting and they want it dressed up in this really nice marketing package and have it look fancy and just really great and appealing. But when it comes down to brass tacks, the best way to stay consistent and have a sustainable diet is to keep it simple. And so unfortunately, people don't like hearing that, but the studies are in, folks, and that's where it's at. So definitely including beef in with your plant-based food groups and your lean animal proteins, staying consistent, getting those 25 to 30 grams of protein per meal is where it's at for sure. So some tips on leanness if your cut's not already considered lean. Of course, besides when you're looking for lean cuts, your terms like round or loin, those are really going to stick out. Not saying the other ones might not be lean, but those ones are definitely always going to be tried and true lean because they just come from parts of the cow that tend to just carry less fat on them. Remember portion size, okay? So when we're talking about all these nutritional facts, this is based off of those 3 ounces. Your beef is delicious and it can be easy to go over those 3 ounces. But if you really want to stick to those nutritional servings, this is in reference to 3 ounces. And that's because if you are keeping track of what you're eating, it's really easy. You could have 6 ounces and all of a sudden what you're tracking nutritionally is actually double of what you thought. So it is important. Portion size is important. trimming fat. So making sure you can trim off just around the outsides or around your roast, or even cooking it and then draining off the fat, especially with your ground beefs, cooking methods. So some people are like, well, I don't like lean cuts because they tend to be drier. If you have leaner cuts and you cook them, so you do like broiling, poaching, or roasting, those can still take lean cuts and make them taste really, really great. And then pairing them with other food groups as well. So when you're pairing, and this really goes the same with anything, when you're pairing food groups, satisfaction and taste just really just immediately skyrocket because you're just getting more complete nutrients, that you're pairing up nutrients, you're pairing up flavors. It can be really fun. And it just gives you a lot more flavor profile for sure. Now, I just have this stuck in here because I think it's really cool because I can guarantee you at least one of you guys are surprised at the fact that there's nearly 40 cuts of beef that are considered lean cuts according to the definition by the USDA. So we went from back when I was born in 89 to having 6 cuts that met that definition to, to 38 and 13 and now up to nearly 40. So it's crazy. So there's definitely options for people. And we're not trying to be tricky by saying lean. It does kind of speak for the majority of the cuts you're going to find. And really, when we look at the beef fat facts, a little tongue twister for you. One, you don't have to be scared of fat. Everybody wants to think that fat is a killer, fat's out there to get you. People like things to be black and white, but it's not. Really, when it comes to nutrients, there is too much of a good thing. Taking everything in within the recommendations is where you're going to get the best bang for your buck when it comes to nutrients. So all the research we have here on beef in reference to saturated fat is specific to beef. So I don't want anybody walking away here saying, hey, maybe if saturated fat isn't so bad, then I can eat all these other saturated fat foods, high saturated fat foods, or tell people that it's not, saturated fat isn't what it was. No, just remember this is in reference to research specifically on beef in the diet when we're talking about these saturated fats and the misconceptions. So first off, most of the fat in beef is actually unsaturated fats. About 60% of it is unsaturated fat. So it's like your polys, your monounsaturated fats. So that leaves what? Another 40%. Of that 40%, so you could think about it as in another 10%, or of the 40%, that 30% is saturated fat is actually a type of saturated fat called stearic acid. And that stearic acid actually has research showing that it doesn't actually affect those metabolic markers that we tend to associate with poor cardiometabolic risk or health. So like your LDLs, your low density lipoproteins, and your total cholesterols, things like that. So even of the saturated fat that is in beef, some of that, we're not even really worried about that because we have research showing that it's kind of a moot point. And then even when you're consuming that other saturated fat in there, so let's call that other 30%, right? Saturated fat's not a bad thing. We have to use it in our body, right? We use it to absorb nutrients like vitamins, make hormones for insulation, to cushion our organs. So we still need it. It's just in moderation, right? So what better way to get it than with a tasty piece of meat, right? Where you're getting all those other, you're getting those 10 essential nutrients along with those 9 essential amino acids. I mean, it's really a win-win in my mind. So really, that is back. It never left, in my opinion. But, just remember that when you're diving into those, because I guarantee you the biggest things you're going to talk about with people when it comes to beef, other than the animal welfare thing, when it comes to nutrition, it's going to be about heart health and it's going to be about the fat content. That's really what I usually get on that. So I do have a nice little kind of visual for you guys just to hone in on the fact that 60% of it is really the unsaturated fatty acids, and then the other 40% we already broke down there, but it's not something we really need to be concerned about. And this is the other chart I was telling you guys about, where it kind of gives you front and center so you're not confused. Where's the cow's head? Where's the rump? So it kind of breaks it down within the silhouette of this cow so you can tell where they're coming from. So when you're talking about those lean cuts, right, we're talking about if you see the word loin, so sirloin, or round, so top round, a round rump roast. Those are going to be your leaner cuts. But even if you're getting some other cuts that tend to be fattier, there's ways around it, right? Like we talked about draining it off after you're cooking it, or just trimming up a little more, or maybe just having those cuts a little less often, things like that. Because we are seeing a lot more people buying a whole cow from people. So we don't want to completely ignore other areas of the cow and just say, oh, stick to, your rump and your loin or your rounds, because, you are going to have people. You don't want to waste anything. So giving some different cooking methods and tips for all the different areas are on how to stay leaner with those are still very important as well. So now we're going to head into beef in the early years, which is just a different way of talking about little people, our little kids, our infants and our toddlers. And I love this because really what brought this in as a hot topic is that the USDA dietary guidelines for the first time have included recommendations for kids under 2 and pregnant and lactating women. So now people are like all about this, which I'm super excited about, because I do feel like there's a huge movement surrounding the first 1,000 days of life and even up to the first 8,000 days of life. Because when we think about it, we're like, hey, once that baby starts growing, even in utero, that growth that is happening, we're not getting that window back. It's happened very rapidly, and we're never going to get that window back of growth. So why aren't we talking about this? Why aren't we honing in on this and letting parents know, right? If you're not in nutrition, if you're not in nutrition, you're not a dietitian, you're just a parent, you're just trying to survive. You're not thinking about, well, today is another nutritional opportunity growth window for my child that I'm trying to make sure I optimize, So we really have to just remind people about that. And I like to talk about it, to put it into perspective, is in that first year of life, and a baby will triple its weight, double its length, and its brain increases by 40%. I mean, is that not crazy? And even just think about that. How many times do you see a baby where you're like, oh my goodness, I just saw them a week ago and they're totally different? And it's because they're changing so rapidly. And with that brain development, it makes sense, right? Because you're getting that social development, emotional development, that speech, physical milestones that they're all meeting. So it's really, really important. And beef is a key source of that heme iron, right? When we're talking about heme and non-heme iron, very crucial, right? Because when we're talking about all that growth that's happening, we want that heme iron, which is found in those animal proteins, to be able to support that growth and development for our brain and skeletal neurodevelopment. And even just think about all that production of growth that has to happen when it comes to our blood supply to be able to grow that body, and how important that iron is for that. So according to the American Academy of Pediatrics, there's certain nutrients that are identified that are really, really crucial for these brain development. And so I have them listed here, and the ones that are bolded are the ones that are found in beef. So we can see that these animal proteins, because actually the other really nutrient dense one is dairy. So if you're introducing dairy and beef at those early ages, that's really, really going to be great for our kids, because you're basically meeting all those nutrient needs needed for brain and neurodevelopment. And the one thing that I really try to hone in on with people, because breastfeeding is great, formula is great, but what people need to remember is at 6 months, and they start growing a lot and they're ready to have solid foods, not only does their physical reserve of what mom gave them when they were growing in utero starts going at an all-time low, but their growth starts speeding up. So then their needs also go at an all-time high. So the food we're introducing at that point is crucial, which people always think about. Yeah, keep on feeding them their formula if that's what they're getting. And yes, keep on breastfeeding them if that's what they're that stuff's fine. But at that 6-month marker, whenever, they're developmentally identified as ready to have whole foods, those whole foods you're giving them. And when I say whole foods, I don't mean a whole chunk of food. I'm talking about, your food groups that you're introducing. It's crucial, the ones that you're introducing, because it's such small serving sizes. Every little bit counts to get that those nutrient dense foods into them. So that's why beef can be a really, really, really great source and option for people. So we really want to push foods that are high in protein, iron, zinc, and choline, because those are the nutrients that are going to be needed as this rapid growth is happening. And then those other nutrients are more specific to the neurodevelopment, right? Because we're talking about how the brain increases by 40%. And even beyond that, right? So we're talking about the first 1,000 years, first 1,000 years. first 1,000 days, but even if you're going up to the first 8,000 days, you're still going to see a high needs for that high quality protein, right? Those 9 essential amino acids, your iron, zinc, choline, your vitamins B6 and B12 are still just equally as important. So you want to make every bite count. So we have all those nutrients highlighted here. And it's amazing how in just a little amount of serving, how much nutrients is in there. Because even remember for adults, you only have to get those 3 ounces to get all those nutrients that we're talking about. So this gives a really good visual on what you kind of want to aim for. So around 6 months, remember, you always want to be working, whoever you're working with on your health and medical care team with your child, you want them all synced in and tuned into this, right? When you're ready to start food, you want the go ahead by them, okay? And you want to be working with them. So you don't want to be saying, well, they said no, but Abby over here said yes. You know, you always want this in continuity of, you know, your child being ready for solids and the go ahead by all their health and medical care providers. So when you're starting with pureed beef, you want a very thin consistency, right? Because they're used to just drinking milk. So you can puree it, water it, I shouldn't say water it down, milk it down, I guess, with a little bit of milk so that they're familiar with the taste, the texture, and then slowly work your way up. Eventually, they can do ground beefs and so on and so forth. You can thicken up the textures, and but you always want to be really soft foods. The only thing that you can do that's really helpful if you have a really tough piece of meat is if you just do a really big hunk of it and let them just gnaw on it. And it can also double, it's a really good teether. You don't want it to be, you don't want it to be super uh super loose because you don't want it to fall off, but even just sucking on the juice can be super helpful, and it still has a lot of nutrients in there for them, and then it also gets them used to that taste of beef too. So and it's not that it's not delicious, it's just children have to get used to certain tastes, and so just slowly incorporating that into their flavor profiles and into their, you know, memory bank of taste helps them establish a really good eating pattern. So my last but not least topic, beef and activity. When I was putting this together, I had beef in the athlete, but then I said, you know what? I'm going to put beef in activity because a lot of people don't realize that you do need beef even if you're, you know, going about your daily living activities. And a lot of people don't consider themselves an athlete. When they think athlete, they think, you know, I'm getting paid to do this. You know, but it's like, what about the recreational runner? You know, whether you are running the equivalent of 6 miles a day because you're chasing your children or walking around campus, or you're running 6 miles because that's part of your training plan, you still need to be fueled to do that. So I said, you know what? No, I'm going to put beef in activity so that I don't catch people thinking this doesn't apply to them, because it does. Now, obviously, if you are training harder and you're really pushing harder in the realm of athletics, you know, maybe you're a teenager and you're playing 3 different sports or whatnot, it will look a little differently, but beef still has a really large role to play in physical activity. And a lot of that comes from those 10 essential nutrients and the 9 essential amino acids and the role that it plays in building and preserving that muscle. So beef and physical activity can be really helpful for whatever type of athlete you are, and building muscle and for weight management. Even that comes back to even just, you know, making sure you're honing in on your protein, right? Like making sure you're getting your 25 grams per meal starting early in the day, or even bumping it up to 30. Some people just do and respond a lot better with 30 grams per meal. You know, so we're pairing this with, you know, all your other food groups in your meal and having that higher protein diet, really just getting that support that they need for muscle building and preserving muscle can really make a difference for them. And we have research, as you can see here, that shows that. And especially when it doesn't end beyond, you know, being that aggressive younger athlete. Once you get older, muscle atrophy actually goes up. So really honing in on that protein is equally still important. So no matter what age or stage you are, protein is still very relevant for you to focus on. And then when we're looking at beef and overall health, really with beef, it offers more protein for less calories, right? When we were looking at the few plant sources that do have the similar amounts of those 9 essential amino acids, or when pairing them to get to that 9 essential amino acids, you're doing it at the cost of a lot more calories. So if you're somebody that's trying to use calories elsewhere for the day or just eat less calories, that's something to consider. And then also just the consumption and beef consumption we have linked with such great health markers such as weight, muscle health, and even eating satisfaction. And even just, sticking to the 3 or 4 ounces a day. So really going up to those 4 ounces when we're talking about getting, jumping from the 25 grams to the 30 grams of protein a day, getting those 3 to 4 ounces of high quality protein, such as beef, when you're living that active lifestyle. And I have this great infographic, and these are all infographics you can find on some of the links that I have here, where resources and applications, because just let's be honest, visuals are eye-catching, and they sometimes just sit better and catch people's eye better than just having uh, it presented in a different way. So really just honing in on the fact that beef is good for heart health, satisfaction, building muscle, things like that, and just the small amount of beef you need to accomplish that as well. Which I'm not saying eating a larger amount isn't delicious, but cost effectively, if people are talking about feeding a family, making spaghetti for dinner, getting that serving of beef that you would get even in spaghetti is still going to carry that nutritional punch that you need. And then this is just going over the recommendations again, which we kind of already talked about. And then lastly, I just have, and on every page I have links to other sources, whether it's stuff I pulled on for that page or it just elaborates more about what we were talking about. But I do have some other resources and applications. So the New York Beef Council, of course, the New York Beef Council nutritional resources. So kind of taking more of the directly to where, dietitians might want to head to the Beef Nutritional Education Hub, which is great, and the Beef Research, because there are specific parts of Beef Checkoff that focus solely on research, which is really, really great, because it just really helps us. Unfortunately, the way people move in conceptions of eating and just questions they have move quicker than research. But having areas of checkoff solely devoted to research still helps, even though research just takes a little bit longer. And so it usually, going straight to these hubs, you can find research on pretty much any questions you would get related specifically on beef, if we didn't cover any of those today. And then, of course, contact information. So these include the contact information for the tours that we did this fall, for whichever one you were on, and of course the Beef Council tours, and of course my research, my contact information as long as our social media hubs, because I'm sure you guys will have more questions. So the big thing is not just stopping here at the end of today, continuing that, developing your connection to agricultural food production and maintaining that, because you're going to always get questions about how food's developed, and I'm always going to get questions. So I'm even always trying to continue to keep up on the most relevant research, and even just other producers, whether it's a chicken producer, a dairy producer, a beef producer, because we're all answering similar questions to animal welfare, agriculture, and how we handle sustainability. And of course, we're, as nutrition experts and dietitians, going to be answering similar questions related to agriculture as far as nutrition. So we don't want to stop here. It's not like, oh, check that box off, I'm an expert in nutrition related to agriculture now. I need to continue that. And that's usually why we end up with dietitians in a niche, right? Because it's hard to be an expert on every area. But as your students right now, you have to kind of dive into every corner of nutrition and get a taste of each part of it here. So I hope I did my best to help you explore that and answer a lot of questions that maybe you walked in today with. And of course, hopefully you got a lot of your on-farm questions answered when you were on your tour. Again, I really wished I had been there in person with you guys, especially because I did my nutritional education and requirements at Buff State. So I was really excited for the Western New York tour. But I'm sure I will cross paths with a lot of you. So don't be shy. Definitely reach out and say, hey, I watched your recording when you did your nutrition portion for our beef tour. And definitely reach out if you have any questions. Feel free to utilize any of these resources that I put up here. And again, thank you so much for sticking with me, because I know this was kind of a lengthy one. And have a great rest of your day, and best of luck on your future nutrition career endeavors.